Imagine you're a teenager, you're working at a yogurt shop, and you're planning to have a sleepover after your shift. But then your parents get a call that you're actually not going to be making it home today or ever. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Francesca, and this is where I tell true crime stories, ones that fascinate me and hopefully fascinate you. Today we're going to be talking about the yogurt shop murders. This one has been on my radar for a while, and I finally watched a documentary, so I wanted to condense it and bring it over to you guys. If you're true crime obsessed like I am, then I recommend subscribing because I'm here for you every week with a new true crime story. Now let's get into the video. So we're taking it back 3 decades ago. There's a yogurt shop in Austin, Texas called I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. This was a pretty popular shop, you know, somewhere you can go after school and hang out with your friends, grab a cup of yogurt. It was also a pretty fun place to work, and it was a perfect job for a young teen looking for some hours and to eat some free frozen yogurt. There were 4 teenage girls at the yogurt shop that night of December 6, 1991. It was Jennifer Harbison, who was 17, and her younger sister, Sarah Harbison, who was 15. There were 2 other girls, Eliza Thomas, who was also 17, and the youngest of all 4 was Amy Ayers, and she was 13. Sarah and Jennifer were sisters who got along really well, and everyone described them to just be really lovely girls. Amy, the youngest one, was described as this cowgirl. She had this like old soul. She would ride horses. She loved to ride horses. And Eliza, who was 17, she was described to be this super social young girl who just everyone got along with. And so these 4 girls were really known in the neighborhood just to be these good people, and everyone loved them. The 2 older girls, Jennifer and Eliza, were actually the ones that were closing the shop that night. And then the 2 younger girls, Amy and Sarah, just went to the shop that night. They're all planning on having a sleepover, and so they were just going to go from the shop over to the house that they were going to sleep over at. But unfortunately, they never had that sleepover. So a little bit past midnight that night, the Austin Police Department got a call about a fire at the shop. The police and the fire department all get there, and they find a scene that they'll never forget. Originally, when they first got on the scene, they thought that this was a robbery or attempted burglary gone wrong. But when the smoke finally cleared and all the chaos was done, they realized that there was actually 4 bodies. The 4 girls were found burned in the yogurt shop. So one of the girls was found to be SA'd, and the store was lit on fire in an attempt to destroy any of the evidence. The FBI, forensics, the Texas Department of Public Safety, they were all called in. The lead detective on this case was Austin PD Detective Jones. The detectives, the FBI, everyone is on this case and at this crime scene, and they had actually found that there were 2 guns used. One was a .380 and one was a .22 caliber. So they thought that they were looking for 2 suspects. The only thing was that although they found the bullets, they weren't able to find the weapons in the shop. Their search eventually became nationwide. This whole case blew up in the news and the media. Everybody wanted to find the person responsible for killing these 4 girls. As you can imagine, the whole town was shaken up. They were devastated with this news. They held vigils, and they really tried to be there for the families, especially the Harbison family, who lost both their daughters, and these were their only 2 children. The parents were heartbroken, and the grief was unbearable. When you're watching the news reports and the parents talking to the media, it's really hard to see because you can feel the pain that they are going through. So Detective Jones actually became so close with the families that he felt this pain also like no other. He was actually wearing a shirt that he hated. It was this green neon white striped shirt, but he did vow to the families that he would be wearing the same shirt once he came to them with the news that the people responsible were brought to justice. So in the first investigation, there were 342 people that were considered suspects. The first people that police had to rule out were family members and friends. 8 days after the murder, one of the earliest suspects was a 15-year-old named Maurice Pierce. He was seen at the North Cross Mall with a weapon that matched the same one that was found in the shop, which was a .22 caliber. Maurice was then brought in for questioning, and he was questioned for hours. He was brought in at night, and they lasted all the way up until the morning. Maurice finally tells the police that he did do it, but he did not do it alone. He tells the police that there were 3 other boys that helped him do it. Those were Forrest Welburn, Michael Scott, and Robert Springsteen. In his confession, Maurice kind of implicates Forrest more than the other boys. He tells the police that Forrest had taken his gun and left Maurice at the mall, and then had come back a little bit later, and kind of implicating him like he didn't know where he was and he could have been the one to commit the murders. So before the police go and arrest Forrest, they need to have more solid evidence to bring against him. So the police wire up Maurice and tell him to call Forrest and try to get any information out of him that he could. So when Maurice calls Forrest and the police are listening in, there's nothing that incriminates Forrest and actually kind of rules him out, because none of the details that Forrest was saying kind of lined up with Maurice's story or even the details of the murder itself. So then after this, they decide to bring in Michael and Robert, the other boys who were supposedly there that night as well. They were also questioned but denied being involved, and once they were given a polygraph test and passed, they were let go. The police's investigation continued, and they kept receiving more tips from the public. The police had received tips from a group that were kind of self-professed Satanists. They were a group in town, and tips were saying that they were speaking about the yogurt shop murders. This led the police on a rampage to find anyone that was quote-unquote different. So people that dressed in black, people that believed different things. There was a group that believed a lot of the supernatural stuff, and they were a major target for the police in that investigation. There was one woman that really caught the police's attention because of how many tips were being called in for her. Her name was Claire LeVay, and they said that she ran a group of devil worshippers. So the police were actually working with the TV show 48 Hours at the time, and they had barged into Claire's house and were rummaging all throughout her stuff. They were looking in her closet, they were checking out her books. They had found a box with a skull inside, and the skull had like pieces of suede on it, it had pieces of hair, but then the police realized that it was actually plastic. So they arrested her on TV, and then they found her to be cleared. They didn't find anything in her home, and they called her a weirdo on TV and in the segment. The police were really desperate, and this definitely showed it. The next set of suspects were 2 men that were arrested in an abduction and rape that was not related to the yogurt shop murders, but it was still around the same area. They first arrested and questioned a man named Porfirio Saavedra, and in the questioning, he supposedly confessed to the murders, but he said that he didn't act alone, and he also named Alberto Cortez. He says that he went into the shop and saw the 4 girls, and he tied the first one up with rope, took off her clothes, and tied the rest of the girls using the first girl's clothes. He says that during this whole encounter, he was assaulting the girls in order to make them go unconscious. And a big thing to note is that these men were Mexican. They did come from Mexico. And so if they were charged, they would be brought back to Mexico in order to be tried. Another big thing to note about this particular investigation was that it was being led by the Mexican authorities. So when they look into the men's confessions and they look into the men's stories, it doesn't add up with what really happened. For example, in the confession, the caliber of the gun was incorrect, and they also claimed that they had drenched the whole store in kerosene before lighting it up, which was also incorrect. So Detective Jones had believed that these men falsely confessed. The first man, Saavedra, was seen on TV in the courtroom, teary-eyed, saying that he was forced to sign the confession of the yogurt shops. He says that federal police put a bag over his head, they gagged him, they assaulted him, and they also threatened to hurt his family if he didn't sign the confession. The men ended up not being charged with the murders. So 5 years had passed, and the case had basically gone cold until it is reopened, and it's assigned to a different team, different investigators and detectives. So once the case was reopened, the investigators go back into the original evidence and therefore the original suspects. So remember how the first set of suspects were Maurice, Robert, Forrest, and Michael? So they bring in Robert, and they start questioning him. They ask him about the friends he had at the time, what he was doing that night, and Robert brings up Forrest, Maurice, and Michael. Well, the detectives find that there are inconsistencies in Robert's statement and responses now that they were back then. The detectives also find differences in the statement that Maurice gave to the police with the tape of Maurice's questioning. So with Maurice's first statement and tape, he was in there for hours being questioned by police. So now this is 7 years later, and they go to Maurice's house and begin to question him again. So they mentioned that Maurice's written statement and his tape had differences in between them. The difference being that in one, he said that he had stayed at the mall and Forrest had left with his gun, leaving Maurice at the mall, and then Forrest had come back later. Whereas in another one, Maurice says that he was driving the car with Forrest in it, and they had gone to this creek that was behind the yogurt shop past the parking lot, and Forrest had met up with people there. This creek was known in the community because there was Creek people in it, but really it was a bunch of teenagers doing underage drinking and things of that sort. So in that scenario, Maurice says that Forrest met up with these Creek people, that he went into the yogurt shop and committed the murders. But in the other one, he says that Forrest had left him at the mall and then came back later. When the police start to drill him about this, he says that he just doesn't really remember that night and what happened. So they continue to look into these 4 men, and when they question them, they realize that all 4 men have different stories, but the same people were in all of their stories. And when I tell you that they question them relentlessly. They would question them for days and hours on end. And in these questionings, they ended up getting confessions from Robert and from Michael. Being that Michael and Robert confessed, the police thought that they had enough evidence to bring in all 4 men and charge them with the murders. So 8 years after the murders, the families finally thought that they had justice for their daughters. This was even with no physical evidence and just the confessions given by the 2 men. Years later, the case against Forrest was dismissed because the 2 grand juries could not find him guilty. And shortly after, Maurice's case was also dismissed due to the lack of evidence against him. Who remained in jail and being tried were Robert and Michael. So in 2010, this is now 10 years after the murders, Michael and Robert were on trial for the death penalty. So in this trial, the 2 men's confessions and testimonies were used against each other. The trial ended with Robert being found guilty and put on death row, and Michael being given life in prison. 15 years later, Michael and Robert's trials were deemed unconstitutional due to the 6th Amendment, where citizens have the ability to confront witnesses and know the accusations brought against them. But the men weren't given that, and their testimonies were actually used against each other, and they were not allowed to question each other in court. Their convictions were overturned, and this led to a new trial. However, since it was so many years later, there was new DNA testing that was used in this case. So if you remember, one of the girls was essayed. The testing that they were using in this new trial was only for male DNA. So they found that none of the 4 men's DNA matched the one that was left on the victim in the crime scene. So even with Robert's confession saying that he essayed one of the girls, this led everyone to believe that this was probably a false confession. So no matches were found, and in 2009, both men were released. They were let go after 10 years, but they were not exonerated. So a big lead in this case was that during the original investigation, witnesses that were in the yogurt shop said that they had seen 2 men whispering and conversing in one of the booths in the yogurt shop. And so they knew that there had to be 2 men that were involved in this crime. And with even newer DNA testing, there was an investigation done on the victim that was essayed. And when they looked at the DNA that was left, there were only 16 markets. So it was really hard to be certain that there would be a match, because usually they use 67 to 70 markets of DNA. So as of today, the DNA is still too weak to be able to match and solve the yogurt shop murders. However, investigators are very hopeful that there will be new DNA testing in the near future in order to help solve this case. And that is where I leave you with the yogurt shop murders. Families of the victims still to this day do have hope that one day they will find the people who did this, who were responsible, but they had to learn how to cope and to move on, but still keep the girls in their hearts. This case is very long and very extensive, I do recommend watching the HBO documentary. It is just the Yogurt Shop Murders. It's about 3 or 4 episodes, I believe. It's a series, and I tried to condense it as much as possible, but there was a bunch of information. It's a really interesting watch. You just have to really focus because there's a lot being thrown at you at once. Usually I hate cold cases because I don't like the unknown. I don't like knowing that there's somebody out there that did this and we don't know who it is. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you found this case interesting. And remember to tune in next week because I'm here for you every week with a new story, and I will see you in my next video.